Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to our live panel discussion here about AI. And I suppose this is where I make the joke that everybody you're looking at is, in fact, a real person, and none of us is a deep fake. Um, so today we're going to talk about what's hype, what's real. And, we get a ton of questions about artificial intelligence in security. And so that's going to be our focus today. I also want to indicate as I look at the audience, I see that there are a lot of folks who actually joined us for the panel we did yesterday. Um, and it was on the MGM attacks. And one of the really interesting things there that we'll touch on, we'll come in the room here, is if you believe the attackers in the MGM cyber attack, they were able to use some simple social engineering to get access, make a phone call, trick someone, and they got in. So, as somebody else said on social media, why go through the trouble of using AI when you can just make a phone call? So, I thought it's a good way to get us started here. Okay, if you haven't joined us before, you won't know, and so I'm going to tell you the chat is on the right. I see people are telling us where they're joining from. Good morning. Let us know where you're joining from. Always great to know. Looks like we have folks from the Pacific Northwest, East Coast joining us. Everybody who registered will get a recording of this, and we will send out the slide deck in a link. So we very excited to have you all join us for this. One more quick note about that. There's a little bell at the top of the chat. If it's dinging for you and you want it to stop dinging, just put the little mute button at the top there. Okay. Who are we? Critical Insight defends critical infrastructure against cyber attack. We help organizations prepare for a cyber attack with risk assessments, pen tests, incident response planning. As Fred always says, you don't want to learn how to use the fire extinguisher when the kitchen is on fire. We help folks detect an attack quickly with our Security Operations Center, and we help folks respond decisively to get those attackers out. We are lucky enough to have some really, really terrific partners as we do all of this. One of them is Mike Borgia. He is at Davis Wright Tremaine, which is a law firm that we know very well. Mike, why don't you introduce yourself, and then I'll introduce everybody else.
Sure.
Mike
Oh,
Borgia,
sorry.
not you.
It's reflexive.
I already know
Yeah.
you. Yeah,
They already
that's
know
okay.
you. All right, Mike Borgia, go for it.
Mike Borgia, as Jake mentioned, I'm a partner at Davis Wright Tremaine. It's a law firm headquartered in Seattle, although we have offices all over the country. And I'm myself am based in Denver. Really happy to be here today. This is my second webinar with Critical Insight. So not totally new to this, but excited to talk to you today. AI is a growing part of what we do in the InfoSec sphere. My firm, you can imagine, gets questions all over the board about AI and employment and financial services and AI in copyright issues and IP licensing and things like that, and touch some of that. But in particular, in my practice, where I deal with it is clients really thinking through how to procure AI defensive tools, how to use them to address security risks, how not to use them, how to defend against AI-driven attacks, and just in general, really figuring out how to rethink a lot of their fundamental assumptions about security defensively and offensively as we kind of veer towards an AI-driven cybersecurity age. We're not really there yet, which we'll talk about exactly, but we're on our way.
Awesome, and it's nice to have you. You join us. And one of the nice things about having Mike Borgia around is anytime I have a legal question, I have a handful of folks I call. He is definitely one of them. Also joining us today, Mike Hamilton, who former CISO of Seattle, founder of the company. Fred Langston founded the company with him. He's our chief product officer. He ran the consulting division here for a long time, and knows a fantastic amount about generative AI and other kinds of AI. So we'll be tapping into his knowledge here. My name's Jake Milstein, and I host our events. I do want to say, so there are some things we're going to cover today and some things we're not. We're going to aim to focus on InfoSec, and we'll likely touch on ethics as we go. We're going to try not to talk about copyright, the job losses and changes like the Hollywood strike and whose job is going to be taken. Although, we may touch on it because as people get put out of work, sometimes they turn to nefarious things. We're going to avoid talking about hiring biases, how AI reshapes work in general, although we'll talk about it for cybersecurity. We're not going to make too many Terminator references, how it does medical diagnoses or, replacing attorneys, because we would never want to replace somebody like Mike Borgia. And we will cover the importance of the training sets in AI. So how did we get here? Okay. So I think we've all heard AI as a term for many years. I mean, this will be my second Terminator reference, but hey, there you go. But November 30th of last year was when OpenAI released ChatGPT with Microsoft support, and everybody all of a sudden was using it, and it just exploded. There was a December report. It's from Stanford. This is December 2022, where they said 2023 will see a shocking rollout of AI. Raise your hand if you've seen that to be true. Also, Stanford said, I expect a hit parade of AI that's not ready for prime time, but coming out because it'll be driven by overzealous industry. 100% true. I think we've all seen that. And Mike, machine learning, how does that fit into this?
Yeah, so this is actually, I've taken some quotes from yesterday's Harvard Business Review. And I think it's kind of on brand for me to be at least a little bit cynical about things, because marketing runs the world in a capitalist society. And what we're told is not always the real truth. So, machine learning, statistical models, right? Things like UEBA, right? User and endpoint behavioral analysis. That's been done for a long time using a statistical model. We know what your average activity looks like, and when your asset does something that's 2 standard deviations from that mean, we throw up an alert, right? That's happened for a long time. So now we are being really inundated with all this AI marketing. It's the RSA game where you have some favorite beverage in your cup, and you walk through RSA, and you predetermine what buzzword, when you encounter it, will force you to take a drink. You'll never get out alive. You will never get out alive if you walk through RSA having a drink every time you see AI. So what Harvard Business Review here is talking about is the difference between machine learning and statistical models, if you read the entire article. And they're saying, this AI stuff is kind of going too far, right? It's really an overblown buzzword at this point. And I love the quote at the bottom there. Again, this is yesterday's Harvard Business Review, and I actually think I had this in the news blast this morning as well. So really, a little bit of skepticism, I think, is healthy when we're talking about something that's growing this quickly and has caught the attention of people that fund new companies. I'm going to go to the next slide here. And so here's how just generative AI is proliferating. Okay, we all know about ChatGPT. This is not a comprehensive list. You can contract to set up your own Gen AI. I was talking to someone named Charlene yesterday, and she contracted and put one together called Char GPT, and she trained it with all of her writings, and now she can ask her own basically AI assistant to do a first draft for her, and based on all of her previous writings, it does a pretty good job. So here are a whole bunch of generative AI applications out there. And you can see that money is starting to flow into these from venture capital and private equity and things like that. I love that headline: mention AI in earnings calls and watch that share price leap. Okay, so we are notoriously predisposed to lean into hype when there's something that's changing this quickly. And so I just wanted to kind of ground everything in, everything that you see and all of the marketing that you see maybe good to treat with a little bit of skepticism. Okay, so we can't show you the Gartner hype cycle, but generative AI is at the peak of inflated expectations right now. And if you know something about the hype cycle, you know what's coming after this is the trough of disillusionment. That's neither here nor there, but they are predicting that it's going to take 2 to 5 years to really become something that is ingrained into products that we can trust. There are a lot of issues that need to be worked through, ethics, being able to determine what has been produced by artificial intelligence, especially when we're talking about deep fakes, video, audio, things like that. We said we weren't going to talk about the writer's strike or anything like that, but if a piece of work has been generated by AI and it's somewhat derivative, right? There's litigation in the courts now. Don't know how that's going to go. But 2 to 5 years is about the same place where they think smart robots are going to start to become not so much commoditized, but commonplace. So that, you think about, all this AI stuff you read and think of it as a smart robot. Well, smart robots aren't there yet. There are a lot of other types of AI. And there's a short list right there. They're very, very far behind. And frankly, when we're talking about generative AI, on demand, you write this thing for me, that's okay. Seems to be working reasonably well. That is the tip of the iceberg on what's coming and how this is going to all be brought to bear.
And real quick, and go back one. Hey,
Sure.
Fred, you wanted to add something there, but I also want you to, for people who are not familiar with the Gartner hype cycle, can you just give people you can Google it. Gartner doesn't allow us to throw it in our presentation without giving Gartner a bunch of money. But Fred, can you explain what it is?
It's this kind of almost sinusoidal looking curve that starts out with rising expectations, then you hit peak expectations. You drop then rapidly into what's called the trough of disillusionment, which is that post hype cycle. Everybody, okay, time for reality. And then you get to, I think they call it the plateau of, there's a name for it, but it's
Plateau of Productivity.
Thank you. And it basically saying now these things have been ingrained in our operational models, and now we're using them and understanding them and appropriately applying them. And I did want to talk about, because I do get to talk to Gartner regularly on AI. I get to talk to some analysts over there. And the one thing that they were convinced of is the first thing that will happen in information security is let's say, a virtual tier 1 SOC analyst. They said that is about a year out. And if you've been watching the news, Charlotte, which is an AI built into CrowdStrike, actually is now touting that kind of capability. But the concept is perfect for generative AI because you're going to ask it, what does this data mean, and add additional data. So I don't have to go out and build long queries. I can just ask my assistant to go enrich this particular event with all the surrounding data. That increases efficiency at a huge rate.
And I mean, and when you think about, that efficiency, and we're going to get to this, but it comes at a cost, right, Fred? I mean,
well, and none of this stuff, everybody's got to understand every technology has its maintenance and administration costs, its implementation costs. It's, in this case, you have to continuously train your models to make sure they're reflecting exactly the latest state of the art of what you understand and whatever kind of problems you're trying to solve. So you need a whole new team of new skill sets to manage it. It's definitely going to increase productivity, but it is not free in that sense.
It's like any other tool, we buy in InfoSec, and, here's this great tool, does this great thing. Now throw a body at it.
Yeah.
Or a team or a whole team. Yeah.
For a whole team. So all right, cyber discussion here in 3 parts. Number 1, and by the way, the chat is reflecting this really well. How cyber attackers are using AI And, I see in the chat, Peter saying, AI was a recurring theme at a supply chain conference my colleague was at last week, specifically hackers using it to recreate your voice from just 5 seconds or less of audio. Mike, both Mikes, it's a good thing that our voice isn't out on the internet anywhere, right?
Yeah.
Number two, how cyber defenders are using AI. And that gets to what Fred just talked about. CrowdStrike has Charlotte, and all sorts of different companies are saying, we're the AI security company. What does that mean? And then third is, the cyber concerns of using AI in your org. And Greg is talking in the chat about, his organization has donors, right, is using AI to determine the identification of donors, getting them in the door and getting them to become recruiting donors, right? What are the concerns around that? Not just, and again, not the ethical concerns, but the cyber concerns. And that, and that's what we're going to hit. So Mike, Hamilton, how cyber attackers are using generative AI.
Yeah. We've all read about, and this is obvious, that you can use generative AI to improve your grammar for the bait. All right. I mean, it almost goes without saying. And so it was weaponized right away. And I have an interesting example to show here in a minute. So improving the phishing messaging, right? So that the tells aren't there. It's the grammatical constructs are not messed up. Interestingly, too, this kind of democratizes, right, the international cybercrime. You don't even have to speak the same language of someone you're, trying to, coerce into doing something, or, trip over a booby trap. Fraud, and the example I'm going to show is fraud. So I'll set that aside for right now. We've already started to hear that hackers, whatever you want to call them, are starting to compromise Gen AI applications. And so, that makes it a little harder to trust the output on things like that. I think they need their own security models around them. And, we are going to need some kind of regulation around that. And the federal government is working on that right now. The administration just raised their hand and said, we got to get under the hood here. Notably, that's after a lot of executives in these companies that are developing these technologies voluntarily went to Congress and held up their hands and said, you need to regulate us. Also compromising the data sets that are used for training. This was a fear early on. If you have, AI-based endpoint detection, right, it's only going to detect something that it's been trained to detect. And if you intentionally train it the wrong way, you can fly under that radar. And so there have been researchers that have actually been able to pull this off. And I think it was with the Silence endpoint that they actually did this with. Maybe Fred can keep me honest on that. Obviously, deepfakes for audio and video starting to show up all over the place, including in political ads. That's bad. This social engineering at scale, I thought was a very interesting topic. Especially because it can automate the personalization, right? We're not sending a shotgun blast out over the internet hoping we scoop everybody up. Everything is addressed to individuals and may even be using vernacular or friendly language that the person is going to trust more, right? Let down their guard a little more. That's going to be interesting, and that, to me, that would be the domain of a country being able to do that. And we'll get to that in a second too. I talked about lowering the barrier to international crime, in accelerating malware development. We all know that, you can ask ChatGPT or one of the other generative AI applications to, hey, bang out some code for me. Well, they've started to bang out malware code with these things too. Interestingly, I've asked a couple of questions of Gen AI that were along the lines of, doing bad guy stuff. And when I asked it to, and this, here's the reason I asked this, because I'm actually working as an advisor on a court case on the East Coast. I said, where would I go look on the dark web to buy children's health records? And the AI application told me I should re-examine my life choices and not do those things. So maybe there's a little ethics built into them. I don't know. But I like the quote there. By 2025, the consumerization of AI-enabled fraud will fundamentally change enterprise attack surface, driving more outsourcing and focus on security awareness. Okay, the point there is right today, we have all these ways that we can detect this thing isn't right. This thing is trying to fool me into doing something. This grammar isn't right. This offer isn't right. This doesn't sound right. You know, we do our security awareness training here every 2 weeks, and we go through a lot of examples like that. Well, the examples are not going to be as obvious. And so the training people are going to have, and possibly some other technical controls are going to have to come up to speed to compensate for the fact that these things now look perfect.
And Mike Borgia, a question for you here. So, there on that previous slide, we saw all those AI tools, Chat GPT, on and on and on and on. The bad guys are using those tools. Before Chat GPT's latest update, you could go in and say, write me a phishing campaign. I am a pen tester. Write me a phishing campaign. And it would. From a legal standpoint, what are the responsibilities of those companies around helping criminals be criminals?
Well, yeah, that's a very complex and interesting question. I mean, I think that in general, if you've got something that is, usable in legitimate and illegitimate ways, and people are using it illegitimately, probably not a lot. And we'll see. I mean, we're definitely going to see cases that test that statement. That's kind of a general statement of law, and we'll definitely see, just like we've seen many cases over the years against social media platforms and things like that, right? Trying to hold them liable for content that's put on their site, ways the site might be used to sell, exchange illicit goods, things like that. But as a general proposition, the way the law is right now, and this is kind of a hot political topic, so maybe it'll change. But as the way the law stands right now, I think they would, they'd be fine as long as they're not sort of knowingly designing their product to facilitate bad activities. But it's an interesting area. And I think as politicians, regulators, and others try to get their heads around what the risks are and how to address those risks, I wouldn't be surprised to see proposals, if not actual laws, get passed that try to put more responsibility on this. And as a parallel, I think when you look at, our last webinar together was on the National Cybersecurity Implementation Plan or the National Cybersecurity Strategy, rather, not the plan.
Yeah, the strategy.
And the strategy, one of the things it sought to do is put more liability on software developers, kind of based on the theory of they're in the best position to solve these harms, right? They might not be the one creating the harms. Some of them they might not, but that doesn't matter to us. We want to go and put the onus on the party that is best suited to address those harms, even if some of them might be created by their customers and them using cloud or other types of software irresponsibly. You could see a similar argument here made by regulators or lawmakers.
Yeah, and a really interesting. Go ahead. Sorry, Ron.
I would say, well, and I think the challenge to that is the bad guys understand that, and you can go out and buy a large language model engine, and the training set of malware is well known. And matter of fact, all of us can go down and download millions of samples. You load it, feed that into your large language model, and you now have malware GPT that you sell on the dark web that has no way to enforce those kind of legal restrictions. And that's already in the works. They're already doing that, which means now we're exposing an interface that allows anyone to say, hey, I need to write a piece of malware that does this and describes exactly what you do. You can even describe the target that you want to attack, and it will build in the targeting information without you even having to know that stuff. So we're entering a new era here for malware, just like we're entering a new era for phishing, and in particular things like vishing, voice phishing, where what a perfect way to fool somebody by having the real person's seeming voice telling them to do things, right? We say, go verify this by voice with this person rather than trusting the email. Well, now you're literally going to have that person telling you to do what the bad guys want you to do.
And I want to bring up here the compromising Gen AI data sets. So, there are places you can go and buy Gen AI data sets, legitimate websites. if a malicious actor puts something in there that executes malicious code, and you get it from the idea is you would download it from a site that you trust, but it has some malicious code in there that nobody caught. I mean, Mike Hamilton, you're saying that's a possibility, right?
Yeah, well, not only that, what I've read is it's good at generating well, not good, but I mean, Doug made the point it's like 33%, error free or something like that right now. But what they're experimenting with is polymorphic malware. So stuff that knows how to change in flight. That's really scary. That makes it super hard to detect. And I don't know how actually we're going to compensate for things like that if it gets good at it.
And Mike Borgia, is there liability then for those sites where you can get these Gen AI data? For this webinar, you thought I would have learned to say AI. Where you're downloading those data sets, do they have some, like, oh yeah, these are all good, we've scanned them all, or is there some liability for them to make sure that there's nothing malicious in there?
Yeah, I think right now, and this is all in flux. So when I say yes or no, I mean it's hard to say the way our laws are made, right? They're made by courts all over the country. But I think generally, no. I think they wouldn't have liability, especially if it's open source and something like that. A lot of this is contract. Terms of use is a contract. Terms of use probably says use this on your own risk, right? I'm not going to put this out in the internet and take on liability for it. Maybe under a contract with a software provider, if you're buying this, maybe you have some liability under there, but maybe not. Maybe it disclaims basically everything. And that I don't want to keep going back to it, but that's another thing we talked about with the national cybersecurity strategy was, again, this idea that too much is being disclaimed by the software developers. Everything is getting put on the downstream purchasers, and that they're not in a good place to address those risks. There's one other legal risk I wanted to mention here too, which I think is really interesting, and it goes to a point that was made in the chat about public records. Everyone's gotten a data breach notification letter, right? And those are largely, not entirely, but largely driven by state law, other than in some sectors like healthcare, financial services. So state laws say you got to notify someone of a data breach, and they list information that if breached, you got to notify of. And that's generally things that we think are going to be harmful to you. A company lost your social security number, driver's license number, maybe your health records, username and password, stuff like that, right? But it's not like they lost your name and email address, your name and address, right? The idea being that that's not that harmful, all right? Okay. Here's the problem, I think, and I think their laws are going to struggle to figure out how to deal with this. In a world where it's much easier to combine all these data sets and take all sorts of data that by itself is fairly benign, put it together and build all sorts of profiles about people, and use that to compromise them through phishing emails or other type of fraud, whatever it is. Each incremental breach, though not that risky, gains momentum, kind of like snowballs, right? And becomes this big risky thing that you can use to target people. But what should the law do about that, right? Our laws right now are predicated, or data breach laws are predicated on this idea that the company has to tell the individual so the individual can take some kind of action, right? So if you amend these laws and say, well, now you got to notify everyone about everything, what's the point, right? That's just putting the burden on you. Hey, your address got stolen. Hey, your email address got stolen. What should I do about that? Who the heck knows, right? Nothing. I don't know, right? What are you supposed to do about that? So I'm very interested to see, also concerned, how are laws going to address this? Because I think the fundamental assumption of these laws, like tell people so they can prevent harm, is going to be blown up by AI. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but once it really starts picking up. And I don't know how we'll address that, but hopefully some smart people will think about it.
Yeah. Let me answer the question you asked instead of the one that I answered after I was head down in the chat there, or at least pivot off what Michael just said, because in the national strategy, there's, to me, two key things that are going to intersect with all of the AI frenzy going on. One of those is secure by design. And so there are these principles of designing something securely, right? And in tangent to that, peripheral to that, is SBOM, the software bill of materials. And I can see how uh, a training data set would actually fall under those initiatives and need some kind of assurance, that some kind of underwriter lab seal of approval that this is okay to use for this use. Remember though, those are things that are operated by corporations that make a profit, that want to comply with the regulations, and criminals have no such obligation.
Yeah, and we'll get to the SBOM stuff in a bit when we talk about how cyber companies are saying that they're the AI company for cyber. Mike, Mike Hamilton, you had this email, and you think that this was an AI generated fish.
I do, and the reason that I think this isn't a Chat GPT or other Gen AI generated thing is because I get so much of this. So I have an email account and a domain that I set up in 1988. And so I am on every fraudster's list imaginable. I know every Nigerian prince by name. And so here I get this from Ron Conway. And if you go through here, you're going to, this is the guy basically telling me his bio, right? Here's who I am. That's not funny, Jake. That's not funny. Tell me his bio and here's how I made my money. And, it's, kind of goes on. And there are absolutely no grammatical mistakes in here. It's well written. And now you get to see the money quote. The purpose of this long, boring letter, which is true, is a long, boring letter, is very straightforward. I'm just going to give my money away, and I've designated you as one of those recipients. All you need to do is send me your name. Now that is classic advance fee scam. All right, that is the Nigerian prince, but you can't tell from the prose in here. You cannot tell that's what this is. And I bet this. And by the way, this came. The return address on this, the sender address, was actually a dental care facility in the EU. Okay. So, I mean, they went to all this trouble to do that. It didn't set up like, ronconway.org or something like that to give it, the patina of believability in the return email address. But otherwise, this is so well done. This is what I mean. We're going to need to be trained to recognize stuff like this because a lot of people got scooped up by it. I am absolutely certain that people thought, hey, a billionaire is going to give me some money, right? And I'm also pretty sure billionaire there said, okay, well, this is what it's going to cost you to get your money, and the money only went one way, right? It's an advance fee scam. So, right, here's an example pulled out of my email that I think, and I got this recently. So this is what we're looking at.
I mean, I think we've all seen the quality of phishing is getting better, but
it is.
Yeah. All right, Mike, keep going.
Yeah, but that was over and above. I mean, that was a really good example, I thought. Okay, so so I got asked to be on a state committee for election security. And cybersecurity in elections is not even really a thing. You can't get to a voting machine. But however, and this is the result of a state exercise that I went to in Colorado, that billed itself as a cyber, election cybersecurity exercise, Homeland Security and FEMA and all those people. But it was nothing of the sort. All they talked about was disinformation, how they were going to counter disinformation. All right. That's going to be the big problem coming up, right? Americans' predisposition to believe a piece of messaging that confirms our existing worldview or knows how to pull the levers if we're some kind of single issue voter, right? So there's all these records that have been stolen, right? Nobody knows where the Equifax stuff is. Nobody knows where the OPM, Office of Personnel Management for the United States. Well, we believe China is holding all of that. And when you are a country with a computing infrastructure that is sufficient to do facial recognition at scale across an entire country, so that when someone walks into a restaurant, their social score is immediately known, that's a lot of computing power. And we know that they are charging full steam ahead with AI as well. So when we're talking about all of these records in possession of a nation state that's got these kind of capabilities, they can certainly bring those capabilities to bear and surgically target people for disinformation rather than shotgun blast out across social media so that people share, and all of that. Rather, they can go to different messaging vehicles that don't show up in the public sphere. Therefore, the states that are setting up these organizations to quickly identify and counter disinformation aren't going to see it. And their return on investment is going to be large because the reality is you sway 6,000 voters in 3 key counties in the United States, you swing a presidential election. We are staring down the barrel of this right now. So when we say, how is AI being brought to bear by bad guys, it's not just criminals. It's going to be nation states. So, it's articles show up every day about how China is continuing to try and destabilize the country through disinformation, and they have operatives that are, trolling and sending out all this stuff and repeating it and sharing it, things like this. This is going to be on steroids as we get closer to the 2024 election, and AI will be partially behind it. Have a nice day.
So let's talk about how the cyber defenders are using AI here, Mike.
Okay, and Fred can jump in here too because Fred's pretty up on this. Fred is actually doing quite a bit of research in this right now.
Sure.
So yes, cyber analyst is the 10th fastest growing job in the country, the only cyber job on the top 10 list per the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and projected to be that way until 2029. We need a lot of those people. We need eyes on. And, if AI can help with that, and Fred talked about, or maybe you talked about, Jake, the ability for AI to be that tier 1 analyst, we're almost there now. We are getting very close to actually us implementing a tool like that in our platform, because it will speed up the investigation, the analyst investigation. Something that took 15 minutes, will now take 1 minute. All right. Well, then, minutes count. Aberrational behavior in standard business tools. Let's see. What's a good example? Oh, how about Okta, MGM? Aberrational behavior. There was things going on with their Okta platform that somebody should have detected. And if we can train AI as to what is normal, stuff like that can get, abuse of standard business tools can be detected. It's easy to detect, hey, Cobalt Strike is beaconing on your network. All right, well, that's a bad guy tool. Okta, your multi-factor authentication platform, if that's acting up, that's generally not something that you monitor, but this could take that in the right direction. Defining threat models, turn AI loose on your network and say, here's the route that someone could take to get to this asset, which is worth this much in terms of what it's going to cost you to clean up after this, fines, regulatory oversight, et cetera, et cetera. You can train this stuff to do all of that. So I think it could be brought to bear to define threat models fairly well. And along with that, optimizing the configuration of those networks after it says, well, hey, here's the route something could take. Here's what you ought to do about that. And
so,
then eventually it's just going to be in all of the detection platforms.
Yeah, and so Fred, can you jump in here? You've done a ton of research about, our products, what we provide people. I know, as a consultant, people ask you all the time, okay, like this cyber company says it's using AI. What does that mean? Like what questions should you ask?
Yeah. So, well, I don't know if I have a great set of questions to ask. I'll tell you how we see it being used. One of the ways is to help an analyst build a query. So if you understand how analysts have to plow through terabytes of data, right? They're literally flowing in, a normal enterprise have terabytes of data, events, alerts, all the information, what's going on your network, to write a query to look for something rather than spending an hour or 10 minutes or whatever trying to construct a very well written query. Just ask your assistant there to build the query for you. So these are already existing where they will build the query, enter that query, and go get the information. So take that a step farther. What we see the bad guys using this for is automating their open source intelligence gathering, right? How do they go out and determine what the attack surface they want to go after is? Well, let's turn that around and do the exact same thing on our side by taking those types of tools, which go out and query hundreds of different databases out in the dark web and on the regular web. Well, why don't we just get a chat GPT system that will go out and query those? And I say, tell me everything about this domain. And it will immediately tell you every searchable piece of information available on the internet about that domain, including stuff from Shodan, stuff from other vulnerability lists, things from Have I Been Pwned, pretty much anything that talks about your attack surface, right? So let's turn this around on the bad guys. They're doing it. Let's do it. Let's get ahead of them. Let's monitor these things. That's how we're going to use this to kind of turn the tables on the bad guys. The other places that this is really interesting are things that are very high data. They process a lot of data, like UEBA and packet capture analysis. We can go a lot farther now with AI by taking UEBA and making it more AI focused rather than, as Mike said, a set of statistical boundaries that we're trying to alert on. We can go much deeper with that. Same thing with other places that we apply this. It gets much more effective quickly rather than us going on some best guess approach to identifying security incidents.
So, I mean, that's one question I have. Are these AI, baked in methods actually going to be more effective than some of the things that we use today? That's TBD. Will it work for stuff like that? Yeah. Is it better? I don't know.
I think it is. So like I said, we're testing these things right now, and I'm seeing significant improvements. The one thing that you do tend to lose with these is, especially if it's very machine learning focused, it's what they call non-deterministic outcomes. In other words, it can't tell you how it came to a conclusion, which we see a lot of times when we monitor, in particular. There are certain things out there that rely strictly on machine learning and AI type approaches. They throw out a lot of alerts. Well, you get an alert and you have no idea how the system came to that conclusion. I have to go back now and do the same level of investigation to figure out, why is it telling me that this is a problem? So are you getting more efficiency? I think you're actually losing. In the current use cases of some of these products, some ubiquitous products out there, are actually adding to people's workloads rather than diminishing them. So you got to understand how you're applying it. Like you say, Mike, is it making you more efficient, or are you just exchanging one widget for another, right? So that is a very valid thought.
So some things in there that aren't, that are a little bit of hype, some things in there that aren't, Mike Borgia, if an organization is thinking of using, AI in its cyber defense, and it, starts identifying, we know that AI isn't always right. I think we've all played with some AI that's told us something that's not true. If it blocks something that it shouldn't, is there a legal risk there, or not really, because it has the right idea in mind?
Well, it could be. It depends what it blocks, right? I think all these use cases are exciting, and I think the prospect of being able to automate this is one that it could be very powerful. I think both in security and in AI. I mean, a big part of the game is figuring out what do people do well and what do computers do well. And if you're a security person and you're a defender, you want to take advantage of that to defend, and if you're a hacker, you want to take advantage of that to hack. But I think that what companies need to think about here is, I think most companies that are having success here are going at pace, not trying to rush into it, but breaking off pieces of this and using it in a strategic way. So when companies are looking to procure this type of system, I think they generally do better where the vendor can articulate clearly what the use cases are. We take this kind of data, we think about it this way, we produce this kind of outcome, right? I think we're seeing machine learning and some kind of narrow AI that's quite good at that. When a vendor says, kind of implies that you just turn this thing on and it's going to solve your problems, a lot of red flags should be going up because of the difficulty of doing that. Even if the vendor has this brilliant model of cyber threats, every organization is different. And I just imagine turning that on and then just everything gets blocked in and you're just getting yelled at by your business team and your executive team, right? In terms of the legal risk, I mean, certainly, look, if I wanted to access this file, the system told me no, that's not legal risk, right? But if you're impeding your business, sure, you could have contracts that say you got to deliver on this time frame or this regularly, right? Well, I can't get anything done. Our business team can't get anything done because it's constantly getting blocked. This system's getting shut down. This is isolated. Yeah, and we're just impeding our business. Then you're creating both business and legal risk. I think another legal issue that we will see is, this is creating a ton of data about your employees and what they do. And that's necessary, right? Part of the game here is understanding our employees tend to work this way. And if we see deviations, that's something we might want to flag. And that's the power of this, that we're not just relying on, single factors like, oh, it's a different IP address, therefore bad. Well, no, let's kind of look at the whole picture. But the questions are going to be raised of, well, what kind of employee monitoring is this enabling, right? I think generally speaking, if you're doing this for a security purpose, I would expect, at least in the US in particular, lawmakers, regulators would be fine with that. But all this data you're creating about who's doing what, many companies are going to be tempted to reuse this data for things like understanding productivity and, well, people who work from home, what are they doing right now? So I think we will see a lot of regulatory interest in this and concern about the massive trove of data being created and what we can do about it.
Yeah,
what we can do with it, right?
For sure. And so, now let's get to cyber concerns about AI in your org. Mike Hamilton, why don't you run through this? And then, Mike Borgia, I want to come back to you about building acceptable use policies. Go ahead, Hamilton.
Yeah. How many people in your organization are already dipping their toe in this, whether or not they were authorized to do it, and they've created their own accounts and they're helping themselves to generative AI in order to speed along writing projects or whatever, report writing, whatever. And you don't know about it. And you don't know how that stuff was trained. And, would that cause a problem or not? Well, I think it's good to have a policy around that. It may not be causing a problem now, but it's the kind of thing that, could spiral out of control depending on which of these Gen AI products we were using. I don't know if you've heard of Chaos GPT. That one has a mission to basically destroy the world. That's their mission statement. That's probably not the one you want to use. So ethics too. There's litigation now about I'm a comedian. All of my writing, all of my content is out there, and since AI was trained on internet content, including that which I produced, anything that AI is instructed to do to simulate me is actually a derivative of my work. And so there's a lawsuit there, and maybe Michael can opine in a minute as to where that's going anywhere, because it might not be. But can somebody opt out? Can I say, I don't want data about me training AI? And I can see how the European Union would be probably the first to break this ground, because that's what they do. The right to be forgotten, the right to opt out, and somewhat along the lines of all the cookie notifications you get now when you go to a website. Prompt engineering. How do you talk to these things to get it to do what you want accurately? It can't interpret overly common language. It's probably getting better at it. But if you want a result, you need to be very crisp and specific when you give it a prompt. And so training is probably needed there. Is the training set really the one you want? One of my comments back there in the chat, and this was after a conversation with a public sector organization, they want to use an AI chatbot on their website to create an efficiency so that a human being doesn't answer everybody's question. Well, if that is trained with the totality of the data on the network, such that it can answer questions about anything, it's going to get abused by the public disclosure trolls and people that want to embarrass the police department and the mayor and etc. That will happen. So what training set are we going to use, and is it correct? Because if there's bad data in there, somebody is probably going to need to be in charge of making sure that that is all good and that the bad data come out, or at least things that you don't want exposed, right? And then finally, and this was a great discussion I had yesterday with one of our customers and another consultant that our customer brought in just for the purpose of having us get together and brainstorm. Really ground it in your business strategy, right? This is the buzzword, going back to where we started this presentation, the buzzword is all consuming. Everybody's like, yeah, we got to use this. All of our executives are asking about it all the time. Don't go get it because it's new and shiny. If it's part of your business strategy and there's a way to implement it that aligns with your mission, that's the way to go. So here are just a few concerns. This is all still nascent, and I'm sure these concerns will blow up.
And so
Mike
Borges, a lot to react to there. But how do you build an acceptable use policy? How do you talk to your org about this kind of stuff?
Well, an important realization that a lot of our clients have is that they do not need to start from scratch, right? Because AI, though it as a technology is newish and exciting and all of that, the problems that many organizations are trying to solve with it are not new. They've been trying to solve these problems for years, and then AI is a new way to try to address those problems more efficiently or more effectively, whatever it is, right? So they already have policies that speak to these things, and they don't need to rip that up and start from scratch. They need to think about how their existing policies should be adapted and socialized maybe a bit differently because of AI, but fundamentally the policies are there. So, for example, most of our clients, hopefully, are already going to have policies that say things like, don't take our confidential data or personal information and put it on some website you found on the internet that has like a fancy tool, right? We don't control that. We don't have a contract with that tool. That's a disclosure, lots of problems, right? We already say that. So it shouldn't be new that people come and say now, well, I thought I could just give it all to ChatGPT, right? That's already addressed in the policy, but maybe what we need to do is clarify or socialize the way in which the policy that we've had for years is speaking to some of these new challenges. Another thing, right, that people need to understand is we are liable for the decisions that we make and the actions that we take as an organization. It doesn't really matter how we made those exactly if the outcome is illegal or unlawful in some way. So if we say, let's run all of our candidates through an AI tool and just have the AI tool tell us who the best candidates are, and we'll hire them. And all those candidates are from, one sex or one race or whatever, one religion, doesn't matter. You're going to be liable for that. That's discrimination. And there's no defense that says the fancy computer told me, and that just is what it is, right? You did it. So you're going to have to think about that. And just like your policy says, we're an equal opportunity employer. We don't discriminate in race, gender, ethnicity, religion, etc. You need to make sure that the tools you're using are not causing you to do that, right? So again, this is taking a policy that you've had for years and just understanding how to adapt it to new tools. So that might be, for example, putting in, human level of review. We've talked a lot here about how AI can get it wrong, and AI can go hard into getting it wrong, right? And not only can it get it wrong, but it can get it wrong in a way that looks super convincingly right. Can justify, like the best lawyer, how right it is, even though it's wrong, right? So you think about that. And again, say with hiring, maybe we use that tool to aid processing resumes and thinking about correlations and things like that of different skill sets. But what we need to do is we still need human level review, particularly why this is new, and make sure that we agree with decisions being made, that we have checks put in place to say, are we constantly getting recommended candidates that are like the same person over and over again? What are the consequences of that? So the short answer to your question is don't start from scratch. You already likely have a lot of this defined, whether you've written it in a policy or not. And instead, what you need to think about is how do we apply the rules that we've already made to new technologies. Again, using the example of like recruiting, we already don't discriminate. That's a policy. How do we make sure we're not pushed into that because we're now using a tool that's working differently than we worked when we were doing this manually?
Yeah, I think, one of the other charts that I found was this one for every organization who thinks that, oh, I don't know if there's no shadow AI in my org. Well, there is. I actually think, since I work in marketing and sales, I actually think 14% is actually pretty low. I think it's much more than that. In fact, I'm going to use an AI tool to make clips from this webinar to put it on LinkedIn. Like that's an AI tool that I use. And so, I think this is actually quite low, based on what I'm seeing. Fred, you heard all that. I know you've been thinking a lot about this. Additional thoughts there?
Yeah, well, I'm just going to point out one risk that people don't think about. It was in the news yesterday, and Microsoft was the one that lost 36 terabytes, I believe, of personal data, in this case being API keys, application secrets, passwords that were in a AI training set that they loaded into the equivalent of an S3 bucket with no good permissions on it, and the bad guys grabbed it. So even your training sets are a trove of information, and in fact, maybe critical terms of security, because if you're training on security things, it knows your security. So protect that training set. That's keys to the kingdom.
Yeah. So we talked about lots of things that you can do right now with AI, in security, things to pay attention to. These, I always put up our services slide at the end of this, but, in terms of AI, Fred's working on, how we can use it in our security operations center. We work closely with, with folks like Mike Borgia and legal team on, on compliance and building, acceptable use policies. Obviously he does the legal side, we do the cyber side of it. But as we think about these things, and as you think about how to use it in your environment and how to use it, in InfoSec, it's a fascinating discussion. I did want to put up my email address here, jake@criticalinsight.com, and Michael Borges. If you want to get in touch with anybody at Critical Insight, you can email me. My colleague Ginny is going to put, and we're going to do final thoughts here in a second. My colleague Ginny is going to put a survey in the chat. We do a survey at the end of all of our events. Every time somebody takes one, we give money to an information management charity. So Jenny will put that in the chat, and we love when people take the survey, wonder how we did, was this useful? Somebody left a comment yesterday that has made us all laugh internally. Making fun of me. And if that's you who was there yesterday, I want you to know that I appreciated that one. That's how you get in touch with us. Okay. Last thing here is, we do security awareness training every other week. Mike Hamilton has started to include deep fakes and all sorts of AI. Make sure your folks come to those. And we're going to do some final thoughts here. We're going to go Mike Borgia, and then Fred, and then Mike Hamilton. All right, Mike Borgia, final thoughts for folks here.
Yeah, well, I guess to partially address the question of, what should we do? Because that's a question we get about clients. What do we do? And I think the problem here is we're all in a bit of a gray area. The risks are there. They're growing. Exactly what you do is hard to say. And nobody wants to go and invest lots of money and then say, well, that was the wrong thing. I think in general, as I said, I think companies are having the most success when they're going at this incrementally, understanding where they can benefit from AI and investing there rather than trying to bite off the whole thing. On the defensive side, I think what this is going to take is companies rethinking what people are good at and what they're not good at, and having to rely. And this is the advantage of this advice. This is true regardless of AI. It's just a growing reality. Companies are going to have to become less reliant on individuals to make good decisions, which is going to be hard because that's inevitable to some degree. But when we go to train people about phishing, the advice like, hey, this is spelled wrong, that's spelled wrong, this is weird, that's going to become less helpful. We're going to, I think as Mike or Fred or both alluded to, we're going to need to think more in a technical way around that and rely on people where people are just naturally going to be better than AI, to the extent that's a thing.
Yep. Fred, final thoughts.
Yeah. So I would suggest that people focus on AI technologies that assist people to do their job, as opposed to some standalone technology that's kind of black box AI and spits out a bunch of alerts. Go for things that actually make your people more efficient. That's where you're going to get the best, at least right now, the best gains.
All right, Hamilton, close us out.
Don't be an early adopter unless you really understand the application that you are putting this into. I mean, some stuff is straightforward. A lot of stuff is just not going to work. And some stuff really needs some time to evolve.
Awesome. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope that this was useful. Remember to take the chat, to take the survey. The link is in the chat. And we'll see you next time for the next event. Special thanks to Mike Borgia for joining us. Thank you to Mike Hamilton and Fred Langston. Bye, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Mike.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.